Welcome, Mindy, to the Root of Our Health. I am so excited to have you on. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you, Elizabeth, for the opportunity to talk to your audience.
Yes. When I was doing some research about you, and obviously I know what you do, which again speaks to my heart, speaks to a lot of people that I know, but I really want to, and of course my audience wants to know a little bit more about you, about your story, about, basically how and why you became a functional eating and psychology coach.
Okay. Well, as simple as it is complicated. For me, where I am today is a culmination of not only my training, but my experience with recovery from decades of disordered eating behaviors. For me, it started as it does for many, with diet culture. And I need to add the caveat that not everybody who goes on a diet is going to develop an eating disorder or a disordered relationship with food. But I don't know anybody with an eating disorder or a disordered relationship to food that didn't start with a diet. So I just want to say that. So while diet is what we know to be the single most let's say precursor to leading us to food obsessions, people have a really hard time of letting go to the diet mentality, the black and white thinking, the on or off thinking, the good or bad as it relates to food. So I digressed a little bit, but for me, it was about messages I received. It was about the belief that there was inherent value in looking a certain way. And for me, that message was about being thin, very thin. I grew up in a loving home, but dieting became a family activity. And it was back in the 60s and then in the early 70s that I was living at home still. And so we, as a family, experimented with the Stillman diet and the cabbage soup diet and the Atkins diet. And then there was incessant calorie counting. It was all about calories in, calories out. So that's what set me on the path. And as I got thinner, I was receiving accolades. I was feeling validated. I was feeling very powerful when in fact I was totally disempowered. And this behavior really took me through the decades of my early adulthood. I married very young. I was 21 when I married, had my first daughter at 22, second daughter at 24. And I was more or less going through the motions of being an adult. What was missing was a connection to my body. But I didn't know that until later on. But looking back, I know that that was an issue. And that continues to be an issue for so many of the women that I see today, which is why I bring it up. I hit bottom in my late 30s. My daughters were teenagers. And I can remember an episode where I was preparing dinner, and it was a pasta dinner. And I decided I was going to engage in this meal with my family. And so while preparing, I looked at the side of the box and I saw what the serving size was. And I counted out the pieces of pasta. And I saw it was 30. That was a serving. So I decided I was going to allow myself to have 15. I think back about that dinner, and I don't know why it is so vivid in my memory, but I remember where everyone was sitting at the table, and I have no recollection, nor did I have any idea of what the conversation was about, because I was so busy counting each piece of penne that I was putting into my mouth. That's when I knew things had to change, because I knew right then and there, maybe it was some kind of divine intervention, that I would never get that time back. And that morphed into me realizing that I will never get the time back, the decades of my life that I gave up to a scale or the size of my thighs or the belief that I wasn't enough.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I think, speaking personally, I've been there with you. you know, it just brought back so many memories. Just basically like, the counting, not so much the counting. I think it's so much of the accolades. I said this before in other episodes, but I was a heavy set kid, so to me it was more or less kind of getting over the bullying and everything else. And so it was it was in the same aspect in terms of body. I don't want to say body dysmorphia, but just not liking who I was and who I, my body, how it was, and changing it in any way I could.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
when you're on that path, it's kind of like it's kind of like a freight train, right? You just keep going and going and going. And the more you're hearing the external validations that you're seeking, that, or at least what I was seeking, it was more or less like, I got to keep going. I can't go back. Like, this isn't, so it's more of a mental issue than anything. And so when you brought all of that up, it kind of brought back kind of memories of that. And yes, the time with, family, like I was living at home as well. I was a young teenager. And so I was living at home, and it was just basically like, going through and eating, little chicken here, and then maybe rice cakes and a little carrot, like, 3 or 4 carrots, because, oh my goodness, it has sugar. It's just kind of going through all of that. And yeah, it's amazing how much time and energy that we spend on how we eat and what we eat.
Yeah.
And in order to look a certain way that society puts on us, or that we deem in ourselves that we have to look like. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah. Unfortunately, diet culture, which I believe the diet industry now is close to an $80 billion industry, is really designed and set up for us to fail. But it has cultivated a culture of comparison versus connection. And for so many of us, and the women I speak to, women in midlife, women who are in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and beyond, have spent so much of their lives taking care of others, figuring out how to be, losing sight of who to be, being told that their value is attached to who they attach to, the beliefs they attach to, their success, all of that. It's all outside of ourselves. So, I believe so much of the work that we can do as functional practitioners, helping people understand the root causes, has to start with story. Very often in the functional medicine world, you see a practitioner, and the first step is all about an elimination diet. Well, when I work with clients, and I've married functional medicine with eating psychology coaching, the first thing I talk about is eliminating the inflammatory and the toxic beliefs and thoughts, how they relate to self, and how they relate to our belief system about food. Because so many are afraid of what food will do to them, and what's missing is embracing what food can do for them. So I think that's a really, really important piece in what we do. And back to my story, for me, I spent so many years figuring out how to be. There's no concept of who to be. Maybe somewhere deep down, I thought I was an image of something or other, but I really never knew how to step into myself. I was very fear-driven and fear-based. But when I did go for recovery, I reached out to my family physician, who's a lovely, compassionate, wonderful soul. but he had me coming in for weekly weigh-ins and weekly vital checks. He referred me to a therapist for talk therapy, where we talked about who to blame and what was wrong with me. And then, of course, a dietitian that had me on a food plan that was totally unsustainable for me. No one helped me to ask what I was hungry for. And not only that, nobody looked at the possibility of a biological root cause to my disordered eating behavior. Was the fact that I was so heavily restricting, causing malnourishment that was affecting how my brain was functioning. You know, I often tell stories, and as a coach, I can share so much about myself with my clients, that I remember not being able to read a book, a novel, you know, a beach novel, a fun, trashy novel. Couldn't get through it because my mind was always thinking about what I had eaten that day and what I was not going to eat the next day. I will never forget the day that I finished that first book during recovery. It was amazing. It was almost though, you know how you realize the pain is gone? You didn't realize how much pain you were in until the day you wake up and the pain is gone. Well, that's what it was like. And it was amazing. So we need to look at the fact that eating disorders create malnutrition, deficiencies in the body, which translate to deficiencies in the brain. We need to look at how the gut is reacting to restricting, how the gut is reacting to episodes of binging and purging, if that's the case. And we also need to understand what the stress of it all, not only the emotional, psychological stress, but the physical stress on the body, what that's doing to the gut microbiome. So that's where we can marry functional medicine and recovery.
Yeah. Yeah. And that, I mean, you brought it up that nobody's asking that question. Nobody's looking at it that way. Everybody's looking at it as a disease that needs to be fixed, but how do you fix it? I mean, you're fixing it in the wrong, you're basically doing the same things as if we were going down that path again, like, you know, restricted eating, like you said, the elimination diet. I mean, I was all gung-ho about that because it is restrictive. But people, we need to be careful, you know, in determining who can we, or anybody, you know, I don't want to say prescribe, but just, you know, give knowledge of such a diet, so to speak. And yeah, dietitians and, you know, going through therapy, nobody knows but yourself what you're going through. Right?
We are the expert of our experience.
Exactly.
Okay. But, you know, instead of an elimination diet, how about if we present it as a therapeutic protocol?
Right.
Right? Because there are clients that I see that do need to swap out certain foods,
right,
in order to facilitate healing. Right? I don't want somebody who's been restricting to start following what the conventional recovery protocol calls an all foods fit diet, because it's not going to address her nutritional needs. I so reject and I so resent the philosophy that in order to prove or commit to your recovery, you need to commit to eating all foods. Yeah. Because chances are you've developed leaky gut, you've developed food sensitivities as a result of that leaky gut, and your brain and your body needs to be fed nutrients that it knows what to do with. Yeah. So, you know, I've heard stories about people in residential treatment, you know, who are forced to eat 2 Pop-Tarts, you know, who are fed basically institutional hospital food, you know, and the plate is lasagna and garlic knots. And when they complain of digestive upset, they're given an additional therapy session instead of having what's going on in there looked at. So that's where we can step in. And that's where we can help our clients to see that saying no to foods that don't make us feel good is not restricting.
Right. See,
And it
it's
takes a
covered.
while to get there. It takes a while to get
Oh
there.
yeah, of course.
Yeah,
I mean,
it takes
especially when it's in a mental state, you're saying, okay, you can eat these foods, it's okay. Now let me pose this in also. Do we, and I don't know, your clients and how many of them do they go through, like in their midlife, do they go through, say they were restrictive eating or anorexia or bulimia, and in any case earlier in life, have they gone through and continued not only that eating disorder, but maybe because we're trying to be healthy, so like the orthorexia, I'm kind of putting this in a personal, so when we're trying to go through the getting healthy and getting your gut all in place, because of gut brain have you seen a lot of, by doing that, have you seen any of the orthorexia come out of that?
I'm hesitating because I have a very skewed opinion of the concept of orthorexia. Okay. If one is following a therapeutic protocol because they are choosing to eat a certain way because it makes them feel like they are their most vibrant self. And I use myself as an example. Okay, and I'm very happy to share exactly what that looks like in a second. Then they're making empowered choices. If someone is choosing to eliminate food groups or certain types of food from their diet with the motivation to be healthy, but they're still disconnected from their body and they are upholding a set of rules and living by a set of shoulds and shouldn'ts, yes, then that falls under the umbrella of orthorexia, that is disordered eating.
Got it.
So I'm hesitating because I want to say this the right way. So my issue with the concept of orthorexia is all about motivation and empowerment. If it's about restricting, then it's disordered eating. If it's about empowerment to feel really good in your body because you're connected, and why should I eat something that doesn't make me feel my best? How can that be disordered?
Right.
Technically, disordered eating is described as eating disorder behavior to a lesser degree, with lesser consequences medically and psychologically. I see a lot of women who are struggling with disordered eating that I define as misguided behavior that is driven by misinformation. Following the latest diet craze. Keto is a great example of that. Everybody got on the keto train for a while, but nobody stopped to think, hey, you know what? Can my liver handle all this fat? Do I have non-alcoholic fatty liver disease? How's my gallbladder functioning? Whereas keto becomes sold to them as a way to help your body burn the most amount of fat, right? For some people, it might work, but it might not work for everybody. Two people could be eating the same diet. You could be eating what you think is the healthiest diet on earth. Your body might not agree. Especially if you're struggling with disordered eating behaviors that have created imbalances in your gut. You might have small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. You might have small intestinal fungal overgrowth. All Foods Fit is not going to help you. All types of fruits and vegetables are not going to help you. So it's really a question of diving deep, experimenting, And I'm not saying that it's necessary to go through all kinds of expensive functional testing. What it has to start with awareness, and it has to start with connecting to the wisdom of your body, which so many of us midlife women have lost.
Agree. Thank you for clarifying that. And I'm on that agreement. I'm on that train. I'm basically, there is a point, a fine line in, that orthorexia, diagnosis, to where, yes, it's eating clean and eating good and feeling and exercising and feeling good about yourself is nothing bad. But when it takes on to the form of, what an eating disorder was in the past, I think then you can kind of go back and say, okay, well, maybe this is going down that wrong path. And then to your point, when you do have that eating disorder, or disordered eating, I thank you again for clarifying that too. It does, mess up your chemistry, your biology, and messes it up. So then to your point again, then to on top of that, instead of cleaning that up, figuring that out, getting to that root cause, you're going from one diet to the other, and then you're messing it up even more, right? I'm a perfect case for that. So I did not do any testing, and yet you don't have to always do testing, but I firmly believe at least once, do some testing, get an understanding of your genealogy and what you're susceptible in your life. I went down that carnivore path, and without even knowing until I took the testing, that I am susceptible to high cholesterol. So I was doing my body more of a disservice by just adding it on, because I heard it was, it's good for your gut and everything else. So we got to be careful with that, right? We have to seek out, again, functional medicine practitioners, because those doctors aren't going to, and I'm not putting anybody down, because they do a great job, but the functional medicine doctors or the integrative doctors will get to the bottom of really what your chemistry is, and what you can and cannot eat, or can and cannot do. So when you have that baseline, then there's nowhere but up to go, and nowhere but, like you said, to figure things out. Okay, well, let me eat this. Oh, wait, this is happening to my body because I ate that. I have a headache because I ate that. My gut, I feel bloated because I ate that. And I don't know if I give my clients a food log, a food journal.
I do too.
Right. And it's not only just, I don't like counting calories. It's more or less what you eat, it's putting it down on paper, but it's also on the bottom, as you know, your lifestyle. How are you sleeping? Are you stressed? What's your relationships like? Because all of that in combination of what you're eating, what you're doing in your life, can mess up your internal system, especially, like, again, your brain and your gut, they speak to each other. So whether your brain is telling you, I can't do this, or, whatever it's saying, it's going to feed down into your gut, and especially the stress, feed down into your gut, and you're not going to digest food properly. No. And then also, when you eat something and it's not, your gut lining is broken, torn, it's not going to send that, good signal to your brain. So yes, we're on that same page.
Absolutely. No, it's so true. And, as far as, look, testing is very valuable, but not everybody has the ability to be tested, right? So I'm a big believer in test, don't guess. But usually we can start off with just experimenting, swapping things out, putting different choices in, and seeing what the body does with the food you're eating. That's what functional nutrition is about, right? It's not only what you're eating, it's what your body is doing with what you're eating. But I wanted also to talk about the fact that in order to get to that point, to be willing to connect to the wisdom of your body. There has to be some letting go. There has to be letting go of that belief system that got you there in the first place, right? What was the context within which these behaviors evolved? What was the story? And for so many women, they're attached to their story. And the other thing to remember is that the eating disorder behaviors, the disordered eating behaviors, did not start out as the problem. They started out as the solution. They became the problem when the psychological, emotional, and physical consequences ensued. But they started out as a means to self-soothe, as a means to help us feel safe in a world that we don't feel safe in. And they also became reflective of how we source our self-worth, right? Our relationship to self is reflected in our relationship to everything else. And it's also important to note that our very first experience with being seen and heard and nurtured has to do with being fed, right? This was a time in our lives we're just born, there's no ego, there's no sense of self. It's just all about us depending on the person responsible for our care and feeding. And very often, somewhere along the way, there was a detour. We stopped feeling safe, we stopped feeling secure, we stopped feeling belonging, but the brain remembers being fed felt better. And that's why our relationship with food is so inherent. And that's why when we have a tough day, whether we're coming home or we're stuck in all day, and nighttime is the first time for many, if not the only time of day when we're alone with our thoughts, those voices can raise up and be really loud. Those voices of needing to belong, those voices that are anger wanting to be expressed, loneliness needing to be expressed, boredom. How do we fill the time? Food is the tool. So that's when it becomes important to become aware, invite in curiosity, and ask what it is that I can let go of that's not serving me.
That's a good tip, a really good one.
Yeah.
Is that something that you tell all your clients? Like,
It's the first thing I tell my clients. It is the foundation of the work that we do. As I said before, whereas the first step for many functional practitioners is elimination diet, my first step is all about what kind of thoughts and belief systems about yourself can you eliminate? What can I let go of? Because the truth is, what we don't let go of ends up being what we choose.
Right. And for midlife women, we've held on to all these beliefs for so long, and coming into being, midlife and the hormone changing and, things, our bodies changing even more so. How do you approach that in your sessions? Like, especially, I know you deal a lot with midlife women, but
Yes.
So combining their past beliefs and going into their, current beliefs, then all of a sudden they're hit with the wave of, the menopause, and just also having to care more for, their elderlies and children and just everything all in general. How do you approach that in your sessions?
Yeah. Also honoring there's very often loss and grief, which sets us back to hold on to what makes us feel best, right? That need to self-soothe. Okay, so as I said, we start with story. What parts of their story can they let go of? I like to use quotes very often, and I say, who was Eleanor Roosevelt said, "No one can make us feel badly about ourselves without our permission." So it's a lot of self-awareness, a lot of curiosity, a lot of compassion, acceptance, understanding, because we can't forgive, and letting go of the past requires a lot of forgiveness until we have compassion and awareness. And then it's about comes the reframe. How can I reframe the story I'm telling myself? How can I turn the page on my story, the part that's no longer serving me, and look at this blank page that I have before me where I can start to write my happily ever after. So it's about motivating them, helping their desire and need motivate them, but inspiring them with the possibility of what's ahead of them. Helping them to not look at their past experiences as failures, but as opportunities to grow, to be excited about what's to come. Embrace the fact that you have all this wisdom. Embrace the fact that society's long gone, looked at the aging woman as the wise crone. I also throw out the whole concept of anti-aging. I talk a lot about grace and dignity and knowledge and wisdom. And when it comes to connecting to the wisdom of your body, appreciating what our bodies have done for us, I will share with you very transparently. I'm 66 years old. There are days when I don't feel good in or about my body, right? My skin is changing. Everything is falling. But at the same time, I can be so empowered with my wisdom and the fact that I can look at how much I have to be grateful for. It starts with gratitude. The very first step of my 7-step signature framework, which is an acronym for freedom, is finding your enough, facing your feelings, and feeling the love, which speaks to gratitude. So I ask the question, what can you let go of today that will allow you to fully taste the abundance in your life as it is right now? And that's a good starting point.
Wow, thank you. Yeah, I that's beautifully said, because that's what we need, is to honor our bodies and honor our age, and be grateful for what we've gone through all of these years, right?
Yeah.
Like our bodies took us to today, and it's taking us through, however long we want to live. But at the same time, it's also up to us to treat it well. And yes, I agree with the anti-aging. Although I've used the words or the phrase, so I'm trying not to use them so much,
Yeah.
but I get it. It's having grace. It is having grace with our with growing older and wiser. So yeah.
But what, Elizabeth, also, a big part of this really is about trusting our bodies.
Mm-hmm.
And that takes time. It really does. It doesn't happen overnight. And that starts with willingness, right? Willingness to trust, because we can never love what we don't trust. And we certainly can't trust what we don't love. And in order for us to get to the point where we can stop fearing what food will do to us and start embracing what it can do for us, we have to develop trust. And again, it starts with us. And I just said to a client the other day, you will not learn to love your body until you love your body. In other words, you're not going to be happy with what you see unless you can show your body some love by feeding it well, nurturing it well, engaging in breath work, appropriate exercise, rather than punishing it in the gym or with running and pushing yourself as a means to make it go away.
Oh, I'm right there with you on that one.
Right.
I did that to myself.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
We all did, right? So it's about slowing down, but it's also realizing that there is ambiguity along the way, right? I mean, you think about it. You've got one foot on the gas because your intentions are to go forward. Your intentions are to let go of these destructive behaviors. But the fear is putting the foot on the brake. So understanding that. The other thing that's important to recognize is that there are 4 blocks to recovery. And let's talk about recovery. Recovery, the definition of recovery is to regain what was lost or taken. So it's quite a big word. Lots of meaning can fall under that umbrella of recovery. And it's so nuanced. There's so much innuendo. And recovering from an eating disorder cannot be about weight. It cannot be about BMI. It cannot be about food groups. It has to be relational. It has to start with relationship to self. It has to start with how we source our self-worth. It has to start with story. It has to start with biology and possibly even genetics. There's a huge genetic component they're discovering now with eating disorders. The biological component, this was very interesting to me. Children who have chronic GI issues grow up with a higher predisposition to eating disorders than those that don't. That certainly speaks to the gut-brain connection. It speaks to the fact that hunger hormones might be dysregulated. It speaks to a lot. That can't be overlooked. So self-worth, biology, story, acceptance of the fact that transformation is not always comfortable. That's where the willingness comes in. For some, it's ability, because some people, because of trauma they may have suffered, find that it's hard to connect with their bodies. It's easier to leave the body. So work has to be done there too. And then, of course, there's mindset. We can operate from a mindset of abundance, or we can operate from a mindset of scarcity. Abundance is about boundaries, honoring, trust. Scarcity is about fear and lack, deprivation, rejection. And finally, if not the most important, is consistency. We need to be consistent. And I talked earlier about doing recovery as opposed to being recovered. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we need to just pare down and do recovery. There are days when I might feel triggered and my tendency would be to restrict. Do I really need to eat this? Yes, I do. And those are the days I am doing recovery and making the choice to go forward, because recovery is a choice. Eating disorders are not.
That's interesting. I never heard it that way, but that's very interesting. Are you ever fully recovered?
I believe so.
Yeah.
And I believe it's a mindset.
Okay.
I do. I choose not to give in to the concept of powerlessness. I choose not to believe that one is always sick and suffering. I don't want to buy into that for myself, and I don't want to continue to disempower the women I'm blessed to work with that message, because we are all powerful. Many of us just fear our power. Many of us fear, who will I be without these behaviors that have helped me navigate this world that I don't feel safe in? Our job is to help them see that they are more powerful than they give themselves credit for. And they need not be fearful of their power, because their power is where they will find the love and the peace and the serenity within that they need. That their higher power is really their deepest sense of self, the place within them that they can always return home to. They were born inherently safe. We need just to reclaim that.
Thank you. That's beautiful. I mean, that's a way to end this podcast and this episode. So thank you so much. But before I do have one last question. But before that, where can people find you, reach out to you, and seek your guidance?
Oh, thank you. My website is thefreedompromise.com. You can find me on Instagram at The Freedom Promise. Certainly message me there. Facebook is The Freedom Promise. I have a Facebook group, a private group that's called Stop Fearing Food, The Freedom Promise Way. Actually, this month and going forward monthly, I'll be offering a free Ask Me Anything through Zoom. So if you join my list or join the Facebook group, you will be notified of when these monthly Zoom meetings take place. And they are not recorded in order to respect the privacy of those who participate. So if you want to be there, be there.
Very good. Yes.
Yeah.
Anything else?
No, I just thank you for the opportunity to spread the word and to really partner with you in changing the way we do healthcare and changing the conversation around eating disorders. We can recover and we can partner with a practitioner who will help us to become the master of our own healing.
Yes. And I also thank you for that. And I also want to acknowledge you, Mindy, for doing the work that you're doing. I mean, it is what you said today really, and I'm sure it struck a chord for so many women listening, but it really struck a chord for me. And it was just a beautiful way of honoring ourselves. And so with, I don't want to say just your story, but with how you've blossomed through your journey into helping others do the same. I just want to thank you for that. And thank you for being, an advocate for so many women, especially midlife women who are going through all of this. So thank you again.
Thank you. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Oh, actually, I have one last question. So you're not off
sure. Sorry. Okay. Great. I love your question.
Although I will say that you already basically answered this throughout our conversation, but if you can do one more, I would totally appreciate it. If not, no worries. So the last one is if you could give a favorite quote or any words of inspiration, and you've been so inspirational in this conversation. So I don't know if you could top any of it, but if you can, go ahead.
I have a couple of favorite quotes.
Okay.
The one I shared with you before, Eleanor Roosevelt, no one can make us feel badly about ourselves without our permission. But I'm going to leave with a quote of my own. Transformation is more about what we do. I'm going to start over. Transformation is less about what we do to change and more about what we let go of in an effort to be the change. I'm going to repeat that. Transformation is less about what we do to change and more about what we let go of in an effort to be the change.
That is beautiful. Thank you so much, Mindy, for being on here. I am so inspired, and I'm sure my audience is as well. You are a light for us. So thank you so much for being on here and doing this podcast with me.
Thank you. It's really so great to meet you.
Same here. Have a good
Bye-bye.
one.
Bye-bye.